I'm Matt Doran. In the history of Australian crime, there is one case that stands out from all others for the sheer magnitude of its inhumanity. It comprised incessant, merciless torture, thrill killings, cannibalism, and the gruesome souveniring of victims' bodies. Police finally swooped on the killers and put an end to the carnage, and then, through worldwide news reports, books, documentaries and movies, these ghastly crimes would forevermore be known by a single chilling name: Snowtown. Dusk on Mother's Day, May 1999. A lone car makes its way north from Adelaide through the desolate salt plains, heading for the tiny wheat farming village of Snowtown, 150 kilometres away. 24-year-old David Johnson is accompanying his stepbrother, 19-year-old Jamie Vlasakis. David believes Jamie is taking him to pick up a cheap computer. It's nightfall as they drive into Snowtown, a sleepy village with a population of just a couple of hundred. They pull up in Railway Terrace, outside an old brick building once used as a bank. Eagerly, David Johnson is about to go with Jamie Vlasakis through a side door, unaware of the horror awaiting him. David Johnson will be the final victim in one of the most shocking and gruesome series of murders in the annals of Australian crime. It will be another 2 weeks before police converge on the disused former bank. What they will find will not only horrify them, but give the isolated bush community of Snowtown an international reputation. Adelaide, Australia's so-called City of Churches, a town that has been meticulously planned from its inception. But like all Australian urban centres, it's had to succumb to the realities of 20th century life, as a suburban sprawl of low-cost government housing begins to spread north of the city. Here, unemployment is high and prospects are bleak in these tracts of look-alike prefabricated houses. They become a breeding ground for disillusionment, despair and, inevitably, crime. One of the residents is teenager Clinton Trezise. Clinton's endured a difficult family life, having lived most of his younger years in foster homes. But despite the hardships, he's grown into a carefree, independent, likeable young man with a flamboyant taste in clothes and a happy-go-lucky attitude.
As much as he had an independent spirit, he still had a vulnerability about him. I remember when he got the unit on Phillip Highway, he was ecstatic. He was so excited to be living on his own.
Among the locals who befriend Clinton Trezise are Barry Lane and Robert Wagner. But he is unaware they are members of a group of social misfits whose leader is a dangerous psychopath. In 1992, he's invited to a house in Waterloo Corner Road in the Adelaide suburb of Salisbury North. Clinton is sitting in the lounge room when he's suddenly attacked from behind.
He fell to the ground and was struck repeatedly to the back of the skull. It fractured the back of his skull, and the force of the blows was so great that the front of his skull, which had been up against the floor, was also fractured.
You made a mess of my carpet.
The killer then summons his mates, Robert Wagner and Barry Lane, who live nearby. They drive north into the country and dig a shallow grave on a farm. Clinton's sister, Cherie, attempts to file a missing person report with police.
I think I went to Elizabeth, I can't remember, and said, look, my brother's gone missing. We haven't seen him for a couple of weeks. We've had no contact with him. We can't reach him. His place is a mess, and it's more than usual. It was more than usual when we had a proper look. I need to file a missing persons report.
I just thought he got jack of all the shit that was going on in his life and decided that he was better off away from it all and picked up and moved away. I just thought he'd gone through a different change of life.
Despite Cherie's claim, inexplicably, no missing persons report is filed until his mother files one 3 years later. The killer is a psychopath named John Bunting, a stocky man in his mid-20s. He's a cruel and malevolent monster who lives with his illiterate and partially blind wife, Veronica, in the house at Waterloo Corner Road, Salisbury North.
One of the things he would do as a youngster is grab all sorts of different chemicals and drop insects into them and watch them die in pain. He would dig tunnels under his home until his dad told him it was too dangerous and made him stop. As a teenager, he got into Nazism.
The one unifying factor all the way through his story is the fact that he had a terrible hatred of gays and pedophiles, and he didn't seem to distinguish between the two.
It's at the house in Waterloo Corner Road that Bunting first meets his neighbours, Robert Wagner and Barry Lane, and draws them into his evil web.
Wagner was another troubled kid who grew up in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. He was illiterate and always in having problems at school. He also had problems on the home front. His stepdad was a very strict disciplinarian, used to beat him. He met up with a character called Barry Lane, who was a gay man and cross-dresser, also like to be known as Vanessa, who hung around in the northern suburbs of Adelaide. And basically Lane began a relationship with Wagner, who was at this stage still almost a preteen. He was 13 or so at the time.
Wagner and Lane become frequent visitors to Bunting's house, as does another friend, Mark Hayden, a man of few words who has also fallen under Bunting's evil influence. All three are fascinated by John Bunting's sick obsession with cruelty and vengeance. In 1994, two farmers find a shattered human skull and other skeletal remains at Lower Light, 50 kilometres north of Adelaide. It's been 2 years since Clinton Trezis's murder, and it'll be another 5 years before his remains are identified.
I hope to God he died instantly, but I don't know if he did or whether he just went unconscious. All I can picture is my innocent brother sitting on a couch, such a moron coming up and going whack on the back of his head, going, what?
By the time that Clinton Trezis's remains are found in 1994, John Bunting has gathered around him a larger group of social outcasts. One of these is Elizabeth Harvey, who had separated from her husband, Marcus Johnson.
You can call me Uncle John if you want.
She's moved in with Bunting at Waterloo Corner Road, bringing her two sons from previous marriages, Troy Yude and Jamie Vlasakis. Her son's stepfather, Marcus Johnson, recalls meeting Bunting.
He was not interested in sport. He had no hobbies. It just seemed as if the sun rose and the sun set on paedophilias. And that was virtually all he would discuss.
Both Jamie and Troy have been sexually abused as children by Jamie's birth father. And Troy, in turn, has sexually abused the younger Jamie. Jamie Vlasakis is soon under Bunting's control. In a rented caravan not far from the Waterloo Corner Road house lives an intellectually disabled pensioner, 26-year-old Ray Davies. One day in 1995, Davies' landlady, Suzanne Allen, confronts him at the caravan. She accuses him of molesting a child she knows. He protests his innocence, but Suzanne Allen goes off to report him to police. She then tells her neighbour, John Bunting. It's all the excuse the murderer needs to justify his urge to torture and kill.
He was captured, overpowered by Wagner and Bunting. He was bound and thrown into the boot of a car, taken into bushland and beaten before he was taken back to Bunting's house. There he was tortured further before he was strangled to death with some jumper leads that would be used to start a car.
Also present is Elizabeth Harvey, who is convinced Davies is a pedophile.
Bunting took advantage of this and goaded her into taking part in the assault.
Listen his leg.
She picked up a ceramic tool and stabbed Davies in the leg.
He's going. He's going.
And his body was then dumped in a hole in the backyard of 203.
Nobody seems to care how or why Ray Davies has disappeared. He is not reported missing. Suzanne Allen becomes obsessed with Bunting and makes constant sexual advances. It's a fatal obsession. In 1996, she simply disappears. After her family reports the sudden and mysterious disappearance, police go to Suzanne Allen's home and are disturbed by what they find.
Her place, which was normally quite neat and tidy, was pretty much trashed, and more concerning was the fact that her pets were there, and she was a keen animal lover and would never leave her pets alone.
But Bunting and Wagner know exactly where she is.
Her body was dismembered, parts put in rubbish bags, and eventually she was buried in the backyard of that home in Waterloo Corner Road at Salisbury North, where John Bunting lived.
There's no direct evidence of foul play, so Suzanne Allen is simply declared a missing person. Bunting and Wagner will later claim they found Suzanne dead from a heart attack and that they only dismembered and hid her body so that they could collect her social security payments.
We'll come back for her, mate. On Suze, eh?
The tangled web of relationships around John Bunting is complicated. In 1996, Bunting and Elizabeth Harvey and her two teenage sons, Troy and Jamie, moved to live in a house in the town of Murray Bridge, around 100 kilometres away. But he keeps in contact with Wagner. Bunting and Wagner are now on a roll, driven by greed and an irresistible bloodlust. Bunting constructs a chart which he refers to as the Wall of Spiders. It's a list of potential victims, various acquaintances that in some strange delusion he decides are all child molesters. He often picks out names at random, then calls and abuses them.
You pedophile! I don't care who you call, mate. Call who you want. We'll meet though, won't we? You'll find out real soon.
At the centre of the chart is Barry Lane, his accomplice in the disposal of Clinton Treziz's body. By the spring of 1997, Bunting decides it's time to kill again. His target is Michael Gardner, a flamboyant and openly gay man. He too has had a troubled life. His stepfather resented him because of his sexual orientation, and after being sexually abused by a family friend when he was 14, he was put in foster care. Now, at age 19, he's coming to terms with life, and he rents a room in a house near Robert Wagner's home in northern Adelaide. Michael Gardner's landlady is Nicole Zarita.
I mean, I used to colour his fingernails for him, and he used to wear a wig and call him Michelle, and you know, he let him be who he wanted to be and not feel inhibited.
Nicole Zarita's cousin, Vicky Mills, lives nearby and is having an affair with Robert Wagner. So Michael Gardner soon gets to know them. One day, an incident involving one of Mills's children sparks Wagner and Vicky Mills into a rage.
They came home to discover Michael Gardner chasing an excited kid around the room, all very fun, except that when Gardner grabbed the kid, he accidentally put his hand over the kid's mouth. And this was seen as a sinister move by both Mills and Wagner.
When Michael's landlady, Nicole Zarita, goes on holidays soon afterwards, Wagner links up with Bunting and they attack.
You're a poofter! You're a dirty poofter!
Michael is abducted and taken to a shed at the back of Bunting's house in Murray Bridge. He's tied up, tortured
Hold him up, bro! Hold him up!
and strangled.
Hold him up! Hold him up! Dirty son of a bitch! You're a homosexual, aren't you, mate? You dirty little mongrel!
As he's falling to his knees, Bunting demands that he stands up.
Go, Rob, go! Hold him up!
The knot is getting tighter.
No, mate, hey, easy, tiger.
Michael Gardner struggles ineffectually in his final moments.
You feel the pain? You feel the pain? Look in my eyes!
His attackers will later hack off his limbs and throw his body parts into an acid-filled barrel in the shed.
Mate, that was intense, wasn't it? Come on, quick, we'll find his bloody wallet.
Bunting and Wagner ransack Zarita's house, searching unsuccessfully for Michael's wallet in the hope of obtaining his bank and ID details to access his benefits. They take all his belongings and steal some of her property to make it look as though he robbed her and ran away. Nicole Zarita later finds Michael's wallet in his room under the bed.
Then I started to get phone calls at my house from somebody saying he was Michael's friend, and Michael needed his ID because Michael's wallet was under the bed in the room that he stayed in.
I just want Michael to come and give me my stuff.
And Jamie had known that I had that because Jamie had been around, and I told him I've got his wallet, so he hasn't got his social security card or anything. And they wanted that. And I said to this friend, I said, yeah, and I want my stuff, so Michael better come and see me. And then I got another phone call saying, he really needs his ID. Can you meet me in the park and give it to me? And I'm like, I don't think so.
More threatening calls follow, including someone claiming to be Michael. Nicole dismisses them, but eventually is convinced by Jamie to hand the wallet over. She remains concerned for her boarder's whereabouts, but alarm bells about Michael's disappearance fade away. John Bunting has only ever tolerated Barry Lane because he'd had a relationship with his partner in crime, Robert Wagner. But now, that's over. Barry has taken up with a new lover, Thomas Trevelyan, a mentally disturbed teenager fond of all things military. Ominously, Bunting also believes Lane has been talking. Suddenly, Bunting decides his imaginary spider's web of pedophiles has one common denominator, Barry Lane. So now he sees him as fair game. Barry's time is up. The killer is getting more devious. In the next attack, he'll force his victim to make a tape recording and a phone call to explain his sudden disappearance, in case there are questions asked by relatives or police.
On the bed, Rob! On the bed! Shut up! Shut up!
Bunting, Wagner and Thomas Trevelyan went to Lane's house. They burst in on him and subdued him and tortured him and forced him to make a phone call to his mother in Adelaide.
Hi, Mum. But she's so lovely, your mum, isn't she? Right?
To basically ring up and abuse her and put her off the set.
I'm moving to Queensland.
After this call was finished, Bunting, Wagner and Trevelyan then renewed the assault on Lane.
We didn't make nursery on time.
They used pliers to crush his toes and toenails in some sort of warped experiment to see which was more painful. They beat him up, and they finally, after gaining his financial details, They then strangled him.
Hey, Rob, finish the prick. Finish him! I'll confess, I'll call him. I'll confess to the child molester. You like that, Rob? I made that up myself, mate. I'm smart. I'll confess that. Hey!
His body was wrapped in a carpet and left in the house for a number of days before being removed and taken away and dismembered and put in a barrel.
A female friend of Barry Lane's reports his disappearance to police and also reveals he had told her about Clinton Treziz's murder. But because of the bogus tape recording, police are convinced Barry has simply moved to Queensland. Meanwhile, even though Thomas Trevelyan joined the attack on Barry, he's now beginning to worry about his own safety. By late 1997 in South Australia, 5 people have died in the northern suburbs of Adelaide and in the town of Murray Bridge.
Hold him up!
Their bodies lie secretly buried or dismembered and stuffed into barrels of acid. So far, only the killers know of the hideous fate of Clinton Trezize, Ray Davies, Suzanne Allen, Michael Gardner and Barry Lane. Following Barry Lane's murder, Thomas Trevelyan moves in with killer Robert Wagner and his girlfriend, Vicky Mills. Trevelyan is mentally unstable and emotionally erratic, and he's obsessed with all things military. He soon confides in a cousin that he's been involved in Lane's murder and that he's now concerned for his own safety. Bunting and Wagner now believe that sooner or later, Trevelyan will tell someone about what had happened. In their view, Thomas Trevelyan has to die. They take advantage of his troubled background and stage a suicide.
What are you thinking? You told everyone why! Take him up, Rob! Take him up, Rob! Sorry! Die! Die, you son of a bitch! You smell the pig! Hey!
He's found hanging from a tree in the Adelaide Hills. For some years, police will believe that he's killed himself. By early 1998, Jamie Vlasakis is still living in John Bunting's house, along with his mother, Elizabeth Harvey. By this time, he's become a heroin addict, and he invites a fellow addict, Gavin Porter, to move in. It's a dangerous decision because Bunting has now added drug addicts to his bizarre hate list. While he excuses his protege Jamie's heroin use, he despises Gavin Porter for being a junkie. Gavin's a schizophrenic on a pension, and Bunting soon gets his bank details and PIN number. When Bunting accidentally pricks himself on a needle that Porter has left on the couch, he flies into rage and decides that Porter will be victim number 7. And so, when Jamie is away one day, the familiar murder ritual is played out.
Oh, Jesus Christ, the bastard's waking up! Hey! Easy, tiger!
It's believed that Porter is sleeping in the back of a car when Wagner and Bunting strike.
Mongrel!
After being beaten, tortured and finally murdered, Porter's body is put in a barrel and stored in the garage at the back of the house in Murray Bridge. When Jamie Vlasakis returns to the house, Bunting takes him out to the shed. There, to his horror, he sees the murdered body of his mate, Gavin. His shock is doubled minutes later when Bunting points to a barrel, lifts the lid, showing him the remains of Barry Lane and Michael Gardner.
Oh, Bazzer and Michael Gardner, isn't it? Hello?
Oh, you screwed up, John.
Jamie is repulsed and violently ill, but he's so frightened he agrees to go along with Bunting's plans, including accessing Gavin Porter's social security payments.
I'm just ridding the world of a few bad seats, mate. That's about it.
By August of 1998, Bunting decides that it's time for the impressionable Jamie to have his first taste of murder. He convinces the young man that his older half-brother, Troy, deserves to be punished for having sexually abused him. Armed with makeshift clubs and jack handles, they enter Troy's bedroom.
He's like Jamie! I didn't want you to Jamie, I didn't! Piece of shit! What are you doing? Jamie, what I do?
The group drag him to the bathroom and tape record his voice.
You can help us out here, mate. I want you to say a few things for me, all right?
The repulsive recordings of this horrifying torture and murder will later become known as the voices of the dead.
Because you're not going to Perth, mate, are you? You're staying here with us. Spin it around, Rob. Piece of shit.
Hurry up, bro. It's taking too long.
Have a go yourself. Come on. Have a go, Jamie. Finish him, Rob. Finish him.
Life is fading for Troy. Wagner ensures he loses consciousness. Bunting is exuberant, on a high, loving it.
He's gone. Got him? Yeah, he's gone.
With Troy's lifeless body lying slumped on the floor, Bunting orders Jamie to kick it and then to help dump the body in the shed. With 3 victims now out there in barrels, the stench is becoming overpowering. Jamie is sick and terrified, but has no qualms about accessing his dead brother's social security benefits to buy drugs. There are now 8 people dead, and there's still nothing to stop the killing spree. Apart from the unsolved murder of the still unidentified Clinton Trezise, all police have are a couple of missing persons reports and a number of suspected social security frauds. Like sharks in frenzy, this is a gang that's out of control and will readily feed on its own, as their frequent visitor, Mark Hayden, is about to find out. Mark Hayden is married to Elizabeth Sinclair, and Bunting takes a real dislike to her for the flimsiest of reasons. He decides he'll deal with her later. In the meantime, he decides to target her 18-year-old nephew, Fred Brooks. The teenager must die simply because he's an easy target. The manipulative Bunting is determined that young Jamie will continue to play a part in this terrible nightmare. It's September 1998, just 1 month after Troy's murder.
The attack on Fred Brooks lasted a number of hours and was severe, if not shocking, in its brutality. He was stripped and beaten. He had lit cigarettes placed in his nose and ear. He had a cigarette lighter that was used to burn a smile or smiley in his forehead. The cigarette lighter was then used to burn his nipple. Bunting at one point brought out a machine called a Variac machine, which was used for lead or nickel plating, I believe. The machine was attached to alligator clips, which were then attached to Brooks's genital region. And at a later point, after that had finished, Bunting produced some sparklers. Brooks was still restrained at this point. Bunting split open the sparkler and inserted one end into Brooks's penis, used a lighter to set fire to the sparkler and watched it burn down to the base, even while Brooks was squirming to try and get away. And this apparently amused Bunting and Wagner so much that they did it again with a second sparkler and did the same thing. One of the final things that was done was that Bunting and Wagner used syringes to inject water into Brooks's testicles, and at a later point, sometime after that, Brooks mercifully passed away. Brooks's body was later taken to Mark Hayden's house at Smithfield Plains, that's in the northern suburbs of Adelaide, whereby now the other barrels had been taken for storage. And subsequent to this time, Brooks's Centrelink benefits were then accessed by the murder gang.
Now the madness grows. The torture becomes more extreme. The selection of victims even more random. Just a few weeks later, in October 1998, Bunting and Jamie Vlasakis are sitting in a car in Murray Bridge when they spot 29-year-old Gary O'Dwyer hobbling across the road. O'Dwyer was the victim of a shocking car accident, leaving him to survive on a disability pension. He's easy prey, and Bunting contrives to get them invited to O'Dwyer's home.
They were all sitting around the lounge room having drinks when suddenly Bunting stood up, and it was almost like a signal, and Wagner grabbed O'Dwyer from behind and began to choke him.
Stop, mate, you're killing him. You're killing him.
Bunting at the time said, "Stop, you're killing him," without a trace of irony. They proceeded to beat O'Dwyer up, to use various tortures that had also been used previously, including the Variac machine that had been used on Fred Brooks. They elicited O'Dwyer's financial details from him so they could access his accounts, and recorded his voice in the same way that they had recorded Fred Brooks and Troy Ude, making statements to try and put off their families.
Kill him, Rob. Kill him.
And finally, O'Dwyer was strangled at his house on Francis Street.
Death number 10, and another dismembered body ends up in a barrel. Bunting now lines up the next victim, but the killers are getting careless. This time, the police will get a key lead, and the terrible feeling they might be dealing with serial killings.
You're gonna die, aren't you?
This is now the worst serial killing in Australian history. So far, 10 people have died.
Take it out, please, please take it out.
John Bunting now discovers that Mark Hayden's wife, Elizabeth, knows all about the murder of Clinton Trezise back in 1992, and he decides she has to die. It's barely a month after the killing of the disabled Gary O'Dwyer when Mark Hayden goes out with friends, leaving his wife alone in their house with Bunting and Wagner. They drag her into the bathroom, handcuff, beat and torture her. They stuff a sock down her throat, wrap tape around her head, and then tie a noose around her neck.
Hold still! Hold still, Lee! Die! 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 Die!
Her body is carried to a shed behind the house where the acid-filled barrels with their grisly, reeking contents are stored. Within 72 hours of her disappearance, Elizabeth Hayden's brother reports her missing to police.
Because of the fact that Elizabeth Hayden had been declared a missing person so quickly after her disappearance, this brought the police down on the people surrounding her much quicker than they had done in previous cases. So within a matter of days, the police were interviewing Mark Hayden, Robert Wagner, John Bunting.
It's suspicious that Elizabeth's husband has not reported his wife missing, but there is no immediate evidence to point to the gang. But for the first time since the murders began, the killers are worried. They quickly move the barrels to a property owned by friends of Bunting's near Hoylton in South Australia's north. Bunting tells the unsuspecting couple who own the property that the barrels contain kangaroo carcasses. A few weeks later, detectives visit Hayden's house in Smithfield Plains.
Afternoon, Mr. Hayden. My name's Detective Jones.
Where the police search the bottom of the shed where the barrels had been stored, and one of the detectives senses a smell they associate with dead bodies. They conduct further tests on the property, and using a test called luminol for the presence of blood, they discover there has been blood spilled there.
Neighbours tell the police that Hayden had put some suspicious items into a Land Cruiser. The Land Cruiser is now a vehicle of interest. Detectives interview Mark Hayden, who simply tells them his wife is prone to taking off with other men.
I've got no idea. I don't know where she is.
Detectives find Hayden unconvincing, and they're suspicious about his carefree attitude to his wife's disappearance. But they still have no idea of the extent of the carnage they're about to uncover. Investigators recheck missing persons files and strike a hit. They are able to link Wagner to 3 missing persons cases: Elizabeth Hayden, Barry Lane and Clinton Trezise. Based on all this evidence, Elizabeth's disappearance is declared a major crime, and additional police resources are committed to the case. Thousands of hours of telephone conversations between the suspects are recorded. By late 1998, Bunting is becoming increasingly nervous. And to complicate matters, the unwitting couple on whose property he's been storing the barrels want them removed. Bunting has to act quickly. The couple reluctantly agrees to allow Bunting to park his Land Cruiser and barrels at the couple's new house at Snowtown. But soon they insist he move the barrels because of the awful stench. Desperate to find a permanent home for the barrels and their gory contents, Bunting rents the disused bank building in Snowtown. But moving heavy barrels full of bodies is not a job that can be carried out unnoticed, especially in a small town. A local man, Steve, is on his way to work early in the morning when he notices the strange activity at the old bank building.
We look down the main street of Snowtown, and yeah, we're seeing a couple of people like loading up, and we just like cruise along slowly, just watching them what they were doing, and been taking much notice of it.
Come on, John.
I've answered all your questions, mate. I know nothing. I did nothing.
After being questioned again by detectives, a self-confident Bunting brazenly accuses police of harassment, but does not make a formal complaint. When he doesn't hear anything more for 3 months, he feels the heat is off.
Knock another one off, so to speak.
He's now confident enough to satisfy his bloodlust again, and he's already chosen his victim, Jamie Vlasakis' stepbrother, David Johnson.
We're going to murder him. Are you with him or are you with me?
Bunting orders a compliant Jamie to set up his stepbrother for murder, and Jamie obliges. Jamie tells David he knows of a cheap computer for sale at Snowtown, 150 kilometres away, and suggests they drive there together to pick it up. An unsuspecting David readily agrees.
David, my son, was fantastic. He'd never been in trouble with the police. He was a good dresser. He liked good quality clothes, good quality things in his life. And I think, in a sense, that may have been part of the reason why John Bunting decided he had to be murdered, because David was so everything opposite to what Bunting liked in life.
And so, around dusk on Mother's Day 1999, David Johnson, excited at the prospect of buying a computer, drives to Snowtown with Vlasakis and into a deadly ambush. At the end of the 90-minute drive, Jamie leads David through the side gate of a building, then the unexpected. Once inside the bank, Johnson is suddenly overpowered by Wagner and Bunting.
Shut up! Give me your arms, mate. Shut up! Mate, tell him. Shut up, Dave. Yeah, shut up, mate. Do what he said, mate. Do what he said.
They begin beating him in an attempt to force him to reveal his bank card's PIN number.
Your PIN number, say it!
Give him the pin now. Give him the right one.
Say it!
984.
You know what, this computer? $200 to you, mate. $200.
They use a computer to record prepared sentences for Johnson to recite for later use on telephone answering machines.
Hey, Dave! Silence!
After they finish recording, Wagner and Vlasakis go to a roadhouse in a bid to access money from his account. Now alone with Bunting, Johnson senses he's about to die. He charges at Bunting in a last-ditch effort to escape. In the process, he breaks a couple of Bunting's ribs. He fights back, but with his hands restrained, Bunting has the advantage and overpowers him again.
You son of a bitch! You hurt me? You hurt me.
When Wagner and Vlasakis return empty-handed, Wagner flies into a rage.
I kill him! You don't kill him! Easy, I kill him! Easy! He was out of control! No, I kill him! Mate, you hurt me real bad. You got out of control. Bloody hell!
When Vlasakis returned from his shower, he went into the kitchen where he saw Robert Wagner cooking something on the stove. He recognised this as the piece of flesh that Wagner had cut from David Johnson's body earlier in the night. To his horror, Vlasakis was then offered the piece of flesh to eat. He was promptly sick. However, Bunting and Wagner proceeded to cannibalise the flesh of Johnson.
By the time David Johnson is killed in May 1999, a major criminal investigation is well underway. What they eventually uncover is beyond comprehension. It will stun the nation and make international headlines. For the killers, justice is coming, as once again they turn on each other. By May 1999, detectives are closing in on the gang of killers, but they still have no idea the enormity of their crimes. Incredibly, in the midst of all the police phone taps and constant surveillance, the gang claims its 12th victim, 24-year-old David Johnson. In Snowtown, detectives from Adelaide tell local constable Ian Young about their search for the Land Cruiser.
I pulled my notebook out and I said, oh yes, I can tell you where that is. And I had explained to them that it actually had come into the town back in either late January, early February, and it actually was loaded with some barrels in the back of this vehicle. And that's when they pricked their ears up and the investigation went on from there.
The detectives locate the Land Cruiser at the couple's house and find out that John Bunting is renting a disused bank building in town.
When they went over to the bank, they let themselves in through the side door, went through to the bank vault and opened the bank vault. When they pushed through the plastic, they were hit with a foul stench, which they immediately believed was the smell of dead bodies.
The horrified officers immediately call for reinforcements and special equipment.
A few hours later, in the early evening of May 20th, they went back inside the vault. One police officer opened the lid of each barrel in turn. Another officer who was carrying a video camera then pointed the camera inside each barrel to document what was inside.
Police today confirmed there were 8 victims in the plastic barrels found in a disused bank at Snowtown in South Australia's mid-north.
People didn't believe it, not in a small town like Snowtown. The smell had actually, because the vault door had been opened, the smell had actually gone right through the bank. It was days later that I can actually recall driving down the main street and seeing people coming into the town, even media people, down on their hands and knees trying to smell underneath the door, and also the chute at the side of the bank where or put mail into the bank. They were actually putting their nose in there to see if they could smell anything.
The barrels are taken to Adelaide, where Professor of Anatomy at the University of Adelaide, Marchie Henneberg, is called in to assist in the identification.
I was shocked by the cruelty with which those crimes were perpetrated, because it takes an enormously callous human being to be able to dismember a body of another human being as if it was an object.
As shocking as the discovery was, the torture and dismembering of the bodies is part of a behaviour pattern in serial killers when murder alone can't gratify their sick urges. Criminologist Alan Perry has studied this.
Now that no longer satisfies them, so they have to take it steps further. Those steps frequently involve sort of torturing the victims, dismembering the victims, and in some cases cannibalizing them. But it's usually a progressive sort of development from straightforward killing at the beginning to far more bizarre and ritualistic killing near the end.
It's also possible the killers were trying to destroy evidence of their crimes and were too stupid to realise they were actually partially preserving them.
These bodies looked sort of like mummified. As far as I can tell, the wrong acid was used because the bodies were put into barrels of hydrochloric acid, which does not so easily dissolve human tissues. Had they been put into sulfuric acid, there would be much more damage.
The gruesome discovery is the moment of truth. It's time for police to move in.
Their plan of attack for the day, which included the arrest of John Bunting, Robert Wagner and Mark Hayden. 3 separate squads were sent out with 2 groups each, a search group and an arrest group. The first house that was visited was John Bunting's house. He was arrested along briefly with Elizabeth Harvey, and they were taken to the police station. Bunting was later charged with 1 count of murder. Around the same time, Robert Wagner was arrested, and he was taken to the police station and later charged with 1 count of murder, as was Mark Hayden.
That afternoon, the 3 men are charged with the murder of a person unknown. Jamie Vlasakis is questioned a few days later. He rolls over, and for 6 days he tells them all he knows about the long nightmare in all its horrifying, sickening detail. He then leads police to where the bodies of Ray Davies and Suzanne Allen are buried at Waterloo Corner Road. As news breaks of the grisly discoveries, detectives struggle to explain to the world's media the daunting task they are now facing.
The difficulty we have is that we haven't really identified the victims, and so we can't say for any certainty when they were last seen and when in fact they may have died.
We have located several quite large plastic bags. Now, it's much too early to confirm as to how many bodies that might be there.
Never before in the history of South Australia has the challenge been so great to investigate a series of crimes as a single event.
It is becoming fairly evident that we will now have to resort to DNA profiling to identify the rest of the people.
Police ultimately identify 10 bodies, but are yet to discover Clinton Trezise and Thomas Trevelyan were also victims.
Eventually, Bunting, Wagner and Hayden were charged with 10 counts of murder, and Vlasakis was charged with 5 counts of murder.
At the committal hearing, Vlasakis becomes quite distressed as the other 3 taunt him during witness evidence. Vlasakis is separated from his tormentors for the duration of the lengthy committal hearing. Jamie's mother, Elizabeth Harvey, dies of cancer before she can take part in any of the proceedings. Jamie decides he can now tell the whole truth.
Towards the end of that committal hearing, after the death of Jamie Vlasakis' mother, Vlasakis no longer had a reason to protect his mother and felt able to plead guilty to the murders and turn evidence. This he did, and he was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment with 26 years non-parole. He then became the Crown's star witness at the trials of John Bunting, Robert Wagner and Mark Hayden.
Bunting, Wagner and Hayden are tried in the South Australian Supreme Court on 12 counts of murder. All three at first deny the charges, but eventually Robert Wagner, in the face of overwhelming evidence, pleads guilty to 3 murders. John Bunting and Mark Hayden maintain their innocence. Wagner's Supreme Court trial is interrupted when 3 jurors refuse to continue and withdraw because of the horror of the evidence.
Of the 12 counts, they convicted John Bunting of 11 counts and Wagner of 7 to add to the 3 he had already pled guilty to before the trial.
So, almost 11 months after it begins, the longest criminal trial in South Australia's history comes to an end. At their sentencing, the judge glares at the monsters in the dock, accuses them of being cowards, of having killed for pleasure, and notes they've shown absolutely no remorse. He sentences them to life. In May 2005, the Supreme Court dismissed a final appeal by Bunting and Wagner. Further murder charges against Hayden were dropped when he finally pleaded guilty to assisting in the killing of his wife Elizabeth Hayden and Troy Yude. He was sentenced to 25 years jail with a non-parole period of 18 years.
Well done, John, you've done it again, mate.
John Justin Bunting, life with no parole date set. Robert Joe Wagner, life with no parole date set. Jamie Spiridon Vlasakis, life, parole only after 26 years. Mark Ray Hayden, 25 years, parole only after 18 years. The judge tells Bunting and Wagner, "If I had the power to make an order that you are never to be released, I would unhesitatingly make that order."
I think he's unredeemable. I think I might have actually seen the closest thing to the devil in Australia.
He's gone.
The blackest person Australia may have ever known.
The people of Snowtown are also Bunting and Wagner's victims. The name of their small rural community will forever be synonymous with Australia's worst serial killings, even though it was only the brief, final setting in the terrible saga. With the monsters locked away, all that's left is the grief and suffering of the friends and relatives of the victims.
I do get nightmares, and I do still have some recurring thoughts about what's happened and what's gone down. It's amazing how I can go about every day living and there'll be something just so trivial and it will just rush certain things back. I try very hard to put it back and take it to the back of my brain. I try not to dwell on the things because it just becomes too much for me to handle.
There remains a strong community opinion in South Australia that all the killers should stay in jail. In 2017, Accomplice Mark Hayden's parole application was denied. In 2019, Robert Joe Wagner made a bold bid to the South Australian Supreme Court to have a parole date set, which could pave the way for his eventual release. His feeble argument was that having a parole date set would improve his mental health. Justice Greg Parker promptly dismissed the application, saying he's clearly shown no remorse. In fact, the lack of remorse was on show at Wagner's original sentencing when he declared, "I've only been killing pedophiles." He'll be long dead by the time his 10 consecutive life terms expire, as will Bunting. Meanwhile, Robert Wagner's son, an infant at the time of the killings, had to face his own Snowtown demons.
I've seen stuff that people don't want to dream about. I wanted to give up and slit my throat because I thought I was going to turn out like my dad.
Meanwhile, more than 20 years on, Snowtown is still trying to shake its association with the horror of Australia's worst serial killing case. Facing a dwindling population, some have suggested turning the old bank into a murder museum might attract tourists and business. But such a move would open old wounds for residents who'd much rather the world know Snowtown for its country charm and peaceful setting.